because you come back with the biggest question that remains on your mind, or that was triggered from either the book or people's takeaways about the book or your breakout room discussion, just the question. And then we're going to do lightning rounds on these questions. So that's what we're going to do, starting the breakout rooms now. All right. Welcome back, folks. It's time for questions. So what we are going to do is, normally we do takeaways and questions at this point, but we already started with takeaways. You know, what did people get from that? So now we're going to do the most valuable things, which is the questions. So just go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to put forth your question, just one question per person, the best question that you have. And you can either type the question in, but I recommend actually speaking it out. So it's going to be Shelley followed by Jean. I would like to get as many questions as possible. And then we're going to do lightning round. We're going to pose a question and have people answer it within 1 to 3 sentences. Shelley, Jean, Joe, and Becky. Shelley.
Hey, so I want to give credit to Jade on this one. We had incredible conversation, and it really, for me personally, made me think beyond what I was already thinking. So I really value that. My question is, should we look at everything in the fog?
Wonderful.
And if we see everything in the fog, do we extract all that out?
Okay, should we look at, yeah, let's keep it simple. So should we look at everything in the fog? Okay, very good. Next up is Jean. Jean, what's your question?
Yeah, my question is, we were discussing about, you know, like the goal.
Sorry, you muted yourself.
Sorry. Yeah. So my question is like, I think they mentioned about single-handedly focus on a goal. My question is, there's so much possibility in life. It seems very hard for me to find that single goal. It's like, I want to experience so many different things. And what is the best self or best potential? You know, that's kind of like so many different options.
What's your question?
How do you know which is your best self or best direction of your goal? Because there are too much possibilities.
Okay, how do you determine your best goal? Your best goal. Let me put it that way. Your best goal. All right. Next up is Joe.
We had a really, really good conversation in the breakout room, but my question is going to be similar to the one Jade and Shelley has already brought up. Is the sin of omission ever appropriate? So that's the way of not looking into the fog. So is it you know, and is there even a time stamp on it where you need to address it immediately or not?
Very good. Time stamp. Okay. Thank you. Next up is Becky.
Are there better opportunities I am forfeiting by staying who or where I am?
Okay. Are you forfeiting opportunities by staying where you are? Staying one is okay. By staying. Okay. Next up, thank you. Next up is okay. Judith's question is already taken. So next up is Kevin.
My question is, how can we balance the things, what we don't want and what we need? What do we need?
How do you balance what we don't want and what we need, right?
Yes.
Okay. Balance. Don't want and need. Okay, these are excellent questions. Let's keep going. Next up is Jade, David, John, Jamila, and Jyoti. Are these all Jade? Yeah, go ahead.
Joe brought me to another layer of this whole thing, which is omission always sin?
Okay, is omission always a sin? Very good. Very good. David.
Yeah, I want to ask Kevin's question about balance a little differently. To look into the fog and see everything, I think, is healthy, but the balance is then maybe you get into conflict. So there may be things you don't want to examine. So to me, that's a balance question. Thank you.
Sure. I'll put it up with the first question. Should we look at everything in the fog, or is there a balance? Something. Okay, I'll put it along with that. So I'm going to keep on organizing these questions. So we have a few questions to focus on. Next up is John, Jamila, and Jyoti. John.
Yeah, my question is, why do we have a fog? Like all these sort of things, they sort of serve a purpose in some way.
Mm-hmm. Why do we have a fog?
Yeah,
Very good. Very good. Have a fog. Excellent. Next up is Jamila.
And my question is, can you find your purpose without entering the fog?
Okay, excellent. Wow. Can you find your purpose without entering the fog? Okay, next up is Jyoti.
How much should you reveal about yourself and stay honest?
Very good. How much should you reveal about yourself? All right. So this is good. This is fantastic questions. So what we can do is let's try to keep answers short. Okay, try to keep it like one sentence to maybe at most 4 sentences. Okay, we'll just go through a bunch of questions and do the best you can. And I think it's going to be amazing. So let's just take it in the order in which we got them. Should we look at everything in the fog? What do you guys think? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to answer. Should we look at everything in the fog, or is there a balance? So it's going to be, yeah, you can answer directly. So Kevin says no. Pegor, what do you say?
Briefly, I think eventually, yes.
Okay, very good. And you guys can answer like this. Okay, I think that you can answer a part of it. It just and beautifully put. Next up is going to be, let me see here. It's going to be Jean, Jyoti, and L. Jean.
I think only as much as you can handle, not everything.
Very good. Very good. It's about handling the chaos. Wonderful. Next up is Jyoti and L. Jyoti.
Depending on the expectations you have from life.
Okay, excellent. Next up is L, Joe, and Kent. L.
I think generally, I like only as much as is therapeutic for you and that you need.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next up is Joe, Kent, and Kate. Joe.
Eventually, yes, but only as much as you need. I liked that qualification, as as little as you need to.
And I also like the qualification of as much as you can handle.
Yes.
There's a limit of how much you can handle. Next up is Kent and Kate.
Yeah, I agree with Joe, and I agree with Mawa, Jody, because I think everybody has a fog, and it requires a lot of effort to be able to extrapolate everything from that fog.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, so folks, let's try to keep it short so we can go through all the questions and get as many answers to the questions as we possibly can. Next up is going to be Kate, John, and Nick. Kate.
Yeah, I think the fog serves a purpose for, again, what we can manage. So deal with as much as you can see, and I think it's there for a purpose.
Thank you. Next up is John, Nick, and Becky. John.
Yeah, my comments are sort of in line with what Kate just said. I think there are things in life that are always supposed to be mysterious, like art and novels, and you can't really extract the meaning too much. And I think the fog serves as some sort of like soul marinator or something, right? Some soul stew that you got to let things cook in there until it's ready. Now, sometimes you could let that thing go on for too long, and you don't want to, But I think it's, if it served a purpose, I think it might be along the lines of that.
Thank you. Next up is Nick and Becky. Nick.
Yep, I believe that all should be examined and we should be made aware of them, but wisdom is knowing which are the ones worth pursuing to fully resolve.
Wonderful. Next up is Becky.
Mine is the same as Nick. Not everything in the unknown has the same value, and it's really the emerging dragons that demand our immediate attention.
Wonderful. Very well put. Thank you. And I too like soul marination. Next up is, next question. How do you determine that you're pursuing your best goal or you're pursuing your best self? There are so many, the background is there are so many ways, so many paths you can take. How do you determine that you are on the best path? If you'd like to answer it, go ahead and put exclamation mark. It's going to be Kate, Joe, Sarika, and Nyasha. Kate.
I think right now it's whatever's the biggest challenge for you. So what's causing the most personal growth because it's the most difficult.
Wonderful. Very nice. Next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
To find a trustworthy person to help you discover that.
Thank you.
Feedback loop.
Thank you. Next up is Sarika and Nyasha. Sarika?
If you're not over, Zerka?
Oh, Sarika, followed by, but Nyasha, you're speaking, so go ahead.
All right. So I just think that if you're not overcoming any problem, are you really living at all? Like once you stop overcoming issues and problems, then you're basically dead.
Yes, yes, very nice. Next up is Sarika.
I was gonna say, like, extracting like useful information from the past enough that the decisions forward are benefiting like yourself, people around you, and your community.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Jyoti, Kent, David, and Kevin. Jyoti.
How comfortable are you in your journey?
Very nice. Next up is Kent.
I don't think anybody knows what is the best path. I don't think you would know what is the best path.
Okay.
And yeah, I think the definitive thing is that we have 100 years to live, and you make the choices today that, like, on your deathbed, you will never regret.
Thank you. Next up is David, Kevin, and Becky. David.
I'm going to tag a little bit onto my buddy Joe. The faces of my friends is a mirror.
Very nice. Next up is Kevin, Becky, and John. Kevin.
Find out what's meaningful for you and your loved one. What's important for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Becky.
What you offer to the world and whether or not the world appears to be better with you in it than with you not in it.
Thank you. Next up is Shelley. I'll read it out. Shelley says, sometimes the doors that open to you are the way to go. And then you course correct as you go along. Okay, next up is Jonathan, Nick, and Jade. John.
Yeah, to me, it's like a feeling, it's a sense. It's not really a knowledge thing. I can only liken it to being compelled every day when you get up to connect with the world. as if you were compelled to eat a big, tasty bowl of ice cream.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, I see it as like there is a gradient descent algorithm that I think of. If there are, you know, things that are going up and down, and some are going kind of very fast up, and looking at it at multiple time horizons, and trying to figure out which seems to be the best path, and kind of continuously course correcting. You know, I think that is critical. Next up is Nick and Jade. Nick.
Yep, it's I think when your internal voice is not pulling you elsewhere and you feel present in each moment.
Well, thank you. Next up is Jade.
I'm kind of led to agree with the gentleman who finished by advising everyone to just make the best decisions, that make the decisions that you won't regret, because I kind of feel like we can plan, we can never predict. And I think if we could, the world would be a much different place, because everyone, you know, is leading the world according to, you know, they're trying to make the best decisions, but they often turn out very differently than giving the best outcome.
Thank you. Next question. Is the sin of omission ever appropriate? And is there a timestamp on it? Do you need to correct or look in the fog or correct your sin of omission within a certain period of time? Is there a time in the world? So if you'd like to answer that, go ahead and type a exclamation mark. Joe.
I'm going to say no, but I do think timing is everything. So yeah, it's a very difficult answer though. You know, I'm not a deontologist or anything like that. So it's no.
Okay. Thank you. Next up is Nyasha.
I think no, I wouldn't want to be burnt at the stake. So no.
And David, yes, the dress does make you look fat. Next up is Maritza.
You're asking if a sin of omission is ever okay. I think that if one is talking about omission from a perspective of inward of oneself, I'm going to say no. Lying to yourself just leads to problems. I don't think we should ever do that. If now lying to others, that's probably more gray.
Very good. Next question. Are you forfeiting your opportunities to grow by staying where you are? And how do you know when that is the case? Pegor.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, the question is, are you forfeiting your opportunity to grow by staying where you are? And how do you determine that? Next up is Pegor, Jean, and Maritza.
I would say it's not that you're just forfeiting, you're actually falling behind, because Peterson in his biblical lectures, he talks about that if you stay put, because the world is moving, you're actually falling behind. And so there's no staying put, either move forward or you fall behind. So.
Yeah, I like the Red Queen quote from Alice in Wonderland. Here you have to run as fast as you possibly can just to stay in place. And you have to run twice as far if you want to get anywhere. Next up is Jean and Maritza. Jean.
Yeah, I think you have to run fast and also in the right direction instead of the opposite direction.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, I can't resist this. Then there is the Cheshire cat in Alice in Wonderland saying, you know, Alice asking, you know, where should I go? It depends on where you want to go. If you don't know where you want to go, you can go anywhere. Next up is going to be Maritza, John, and Jade. Maritza.
Everything in life has an opportunity cost. To think otherwise is to delude oneself. So the answer is, of course, there's opportunity cost.
Excellent. Next up is John and Jade. John.
I feel like this question is paradoxical because if all one does is run their whole life, then running is all they know. Staying still becomes their running.
Thank you. Next up is Jade.
I guess I'm going to kind of answer a bit of a question, is that I'm kind of wondering if growth is the only way to fulfill your potential. You know, you might be forfeiting your potential, but is that a bad thing? Because like we prune plants to keep them in their ideal form. So yeah.
Thank you.
The same could be true of humans.
Thank you. Judith says, yes, every choice has an opportunity cost. So do the best you can. Next question. How do you balance what you don't want with what you need? How do you balance what you don't want with what you need?
Can I go?
Yes, go ahead, Pigor.
I'd say anxiety.
What?
Anxiety. Like the reason why we feel anxious is these kinds of things. Like if you're feeling enough, if you're anxious enough that you can't go on with your life in some sense, then you need to work on that thing.
Thank you. Next up is Nyasha.
By going into that source, by sitting alone silently without anything there, just like an animal, like you are diving deep there. That's what you get, what you need. You might be starving, but you will still be alive, and it's what you need. So
wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Kevin, Kent, and Jean. Kevin.
First, what we need is limited. We have enough is enough. And what we want is endless. So, and it's like flowers and needs rain and sun. A partnership, relationship, or love needs to be nurtured. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Kent, Jean, and Joe. Kent.
When it's a thing about balance, is about distribution of resource. So to stay away from something you don't want, it's a preventative thing as opposed to the things that you need and as the things that you want. It's just a redistribution of resources and what works for you.
Thank you. Next up is Jean, Joe, and Jyoti. Jean.
I think what we need usually is good for our physical health, and what we want is good for our psychological health. So we need to balance both to meet both needs to be healthy.
Wonderful. Next up is Joe.
I'm just going to repeat Pegor's answer because I thought it was excellent. Was the idea of anxiety will dictate whether that you can balance what you want and what you need. I mean, that is, and I also think circumstances do play a role, though. Your obligations to others also is a factor.
Thank you. Next up is Jyoti, Shelley, and Maritza. Jyoti.
If you're not becoming resentful in life.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Shelley.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand the question. It's what if what you need is something that you don't want?
Right.
That's the question.
Yeah. So there are things that you need and there are things that you don't want. How do you balance between?
You have to change the way you think then. You have to change thought process.
Very nice. Next up is Marisa.
Very carefully. No, I think I would say that you face it head on and carefully. And then that way you will be able to get through it and move on.
Wonderful. Okay, next question. This is a fundamental question. Why do we have a fog? Why does the fog exist? Let's see, it's going to be Pegor and Jean. Pegor.
Because without the fog, we'll be directly exposed to chaos, and that is deadly.
Wonderful. Very, very well put. Next up is Jean.
Yeah, I think we have limited energy to deal with things. So it's self-protection for us to be survive.
Wonderful. Next up is Judith.
I think sometimes we have a fog because, I mean, the world isn't really very black and white. So sometimes knowing what it is you should be doing is a little hard to figure out. And those things might have layers on them, you know, and that's probably all in the fog.
Next up is Kevin.
We naturally need anything makes sense to ourselves.
Thank you. Shelley says, so we can focus on the most meaningful things in the moment. Next up is John, Maritza, Jyoti, and Becky. John.
I have this hunch that, and I know I'm not the only one who's the first one thought of this, is that sort of our consciousness, right, is sort of analogous to our eye. And our eye, you know, we think we're seeing what's around us, but really it's saccades, right? We're just sort of putting together. And I think we can't really see everything because the universe is utterly terrifying. And fog helps us deal with that. It helps us in our inner world. Much of what other people said, focus on the things we need to. And sometimes our lenses get screwed up.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Maritza, Jyoti, and Becky. Maritza.
Because just like computers, our brain needs a clipboard.
Thank you. Next up is Jyoti.
Yeah, fog is like a protection for a fear of unknown.
Thank you. Next up is Becky.
It's because we have limitations, and it goes back to either fear or denial.
Thank you. Next question. Can you find your purpose without entering the fog? Shelley.
I would say no. I'm open to someone saying something different and rebutting that, but I can't imagine. It's hard for my brain to wrap my mind around that.
Jung would agree with you, you know, in the filth it will be found. So you have to go through. Next up is Kevin, Pegor, and Nick. Kevin.
Yeah, how do you define your purpose without entering fog? Then face it, the purpose cannot stand without fog.
Thank you. Next up, oh, I've lost the track here. Okay, Pegor, Nick, Judith, and Jade. Pegor.
I would say that, and this is, I think, Peterson's message, and like the highest abstraction of this, it's everyone's purpose is to enter their fog, their own fog, and it just manifests differently by person to person.
Thank you. Next up is Nick.
Yep, I'd say no. And I think entering the fog is entering the unknown. And as Peterson has often used as a metaphor, it's Pinocchio rescuing Geppetto from the whale, and confronting and conquering our greatest fears is overcoming what we know we could be if those obstacles weren't there, which is the only way to reach our potential.
Very nice. Next up, Judith says no. Jade, what do you say?
I say yes, if, but you can't do it by yourself. You would need somebody before you who's charting the path for you and clearing the fog, so that you're able to just chart that path without impediments. And there are people who do that for people. It's very rare, but there are people who do make that sacrifice for others.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. So we'll look at that as a kind of interpersonal issues. We'll maybe take questions about that, but very good. Next up is Joe says no. David, what do you say?
You can live a very routine life without getting into the fog. If you get in the fog, you might find nothing at all. You might find something terrible, but you might find something wonderful.
Thank you, David. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I kind of see the fog as your purpose. And if not, almost in like a Dante kind of way, where there are people in hell that just sat on the sidelines and waited to see the outcomes of life. You're almost wasting your life by not engaging. I see the fog as your purpose.
Wonderful, wonderful. So now let's take the questions at an interpersonal level. So when you look at this issue with respect to other people, like at various points, different people brought in where other people were involved in this. There are questions of, should we reveal yourself to other people? Can somebody actually help you with this in dealing with fog? Or so just any kind of questions about other people. So just questions at this point. You can go ahead and put down the questions and we can go for that. Well, maybe not too many questions, but let's try some questions. So take this whole chapter and see how does it apply to interactions between human interactions with others. Is the fog just a purely personal quest? Are there other people involved? And in what are the various ways? So what are the questions you can ask about that? Jean, what's your question?
My question actually is opposite. How can people help you if they don't know what you want?
Okay. How can people help you? Okay. Judith, what's your question?
Well, sometimes people are a product of other people's fog. And what do you do about that?
Very good. What do you do when your product, what you're doing is the result of other people's fog? Societies, and that's very common actually. Okay, all right. Anybody else? Any questions about other people? John. John, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry. Yeah, do people who are trapped in fog, do they want more people in fog, right?
Very good. Trapped in fog. Very, very nice, very interesting. Next up is Kevin. Kevin, what's your question?
How can you find a way, have a deep conversation with others, such culture, religion, or even other topic?
Sure. So let's just put them as a question, how does kind of interaction between people figure into all of this? So I'll just say two things. And now we can just make statements. You can take maybe about a little bit longer because the question is just you and other people. So it's a little bit broader question. So you can take maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds, something like that. So I will say two things. One is that for me, kind of great people, role models, if you will, but that's not even the right thing. Discovering your own potential or human potential is covered in fog. We don't know that automatically. And many times there are people who have shown me that, like Leonardo da Vinci. It's like you're covered with fog, but you see this person up there on the mountain, which you did not even know existed, and they are actually standing there. So that's one thing, that they provide like a beacon. You have to do the climbing yourself, but they provide a beacon that there is something. So that's one thing. And the second great idea that I know of is from Carl Rogers about authentic relating, because your fog is different from other people's fog. And if you're actually relating to other people, you actually end up discovering the shape of your fog a little bit better. So those are the two things that I found useful. Okay, I've lost track of okay, Jade. So now you can either put a question on the table, or you can go ahead and say your piece about what do you think about fog and other people. Jade.
I think It's kind of a question, kind of a takeaway-ish. It's because fog can be used, again, it's one of those things where you have one thing, but it could be leveraged however a person decides to leverage it. So if I'm leveraging fog against or for someone else, I could use it to help them clarify the focus, to block out other things. In the group, we were talking about myopia and how it's used nowadays to talk about people who have a myopic focus as something that's bad. But we were also talking about, and Mike kind of put in a lot of great stuff about this, is how, myopic focus can help you accomplish stuff. Because that's what we talk about also here too, some also. So it's like, is it that paternalistic or parental? Because parents do it too. They will place a fog around their child to protect them from the quote unquote truth that they don't need to know. And then there are predators who will use it to kind of obscure things. Just think about even just physically, you'll have people, police or whatever using like a smoke bomb. The whole point is that people get confused. They can't figure it out. Like it gets people off track. So it's like, but again, if it's strategically used, and it's not just free flowing thing, and I know I'm using a lot of imagery, so hopefully it's still clear. I think it just depends on, who's using it and why.
Wonderful.
And what you're concealing.
Excellent observations. Thank you. Next up is going to be David, Shali, Maritza, Jean, and Jyoti. David.
My friend Shikant, I will also quote Carl Rogers, unconditional positive regard. That was the greatest thing I learned in my divorce recovery weekend. I can speak the truth to my friends and be accepted. It's the greatest gift in the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I absolutely agree. Next up is Shelley and Maritza. Shelley.
So this is very anecdotal, and it's about my own personal life and my own personal experience with the fog. So my ex-husband, we were married 19 and a half years. I've been divorced a little over 10 years now. He, to this day, will not look in the fog. He's never been willing to look in the fog, no matter how much I tried to engage with him to discuss the fog so that we could live a life together that had some kind of purpose and meaning. And he ended up in prison. He lost his family. And just last week, one of my boys was at my house talking with me about how he can't believe how his dad has an utter inability to connect with him on any level when he is in the midst of going through a trial. So that is my anecdotal experience, that getting into the fog is vital to almost every part of your life.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was great. Next up is Maritza, followed by Jean, Jyoti, Joe, and Kevin. Maritza.
I'm brought back to what it is about this chapter that reminds me of my favorite chapter in the first book, 12 Rules for Order. And, Peterson where he tells us, if you will not reveal yourself to others, you cannot reveal yourself to yourself. And that resonates with me because I am very much enticed by the duality of needing to embrace one's own individuality while at the same time embracing culture and community. And I think that the point of what's being said here is that if we don't become aware of those items that are in our fog, we become less capable to deal with that which surrounds us. And so we can extrapolate that failure to deal with some of the things in the fog that we can deal with actually hurts our community. If we are not striving to improve ourselves, and somebody here mentioned movement. So if we're not striving towards moving forward and improving ourselves, because we are one piece of a bigger whole, we're bringing down the whole. And so that alone should kind of help us feel inclined to do a little bit of work. Now, I do believe it was mentioned, but I think Jade mentioned that, maybe some things are better left in the fog. And I actually have no quarrel with that, right? So you may not be ready yet to tackle some of the things in the fog, but so long as you are working on it and you're improving yourself, I believe that some of the things that you work on and you see from the fog will give you that strength and fortitude down the road to tackle other items. And if not from your fog, maybe it's what Shrikant was saying, maybe you can be that beacon to help someone else tackle something that's currently on the periphery, that's in their fog. And the example I would give would be, for me, I had a moment where it was the passing of someone. It took a moment, an instant where, a friend's husband took his own life, and that triggered in me like a catalyst of change, where now I had the strength to handle some things that previously I wasn't entirely unaware they were in the fog. I just knew I couldn't handle it. And then when I looked, I became aware that I thought my fog was this big and it was this big, but it took an outside person. And then when you start seeing it, it just spirals, and you see how you've been hurting the community around you. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think it's like triangulating. The other people are giving you light from different angles, so you can map things out. They have fog, but they also have fog in different places, and they have kind of clarity in different places. And so you can, if you're actually open to actually seeing the other person and communicating with them, you get all of that. Wonderful. Next up is Jean.
Yeah, I think Shirka mentioned about people have different fogs. My personal experience is like being with people who are very different from you actually is the best way to clear your fog. For example, I'm a thinker. I like to think rational. I like Kevin mentioned, like to talk with life philosophy, all this. And I feel pretty trivial. People like congratulate each other birthday, like this birthday. I was like, what a waste of time. But then my good friend who personally congratulated me for my birthday, and I feel great. I was like, oh my God. So it's like, I realized, how that impact a person when people pay attention. So I realized, maybe it's something I need to do, make other people feel good too. So it's very good for me to reflect on that, because I was thinking it's so trivial before. But then I personally experienced that, I thought it's not that bad. So it's actually cleared my fog in some way.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, this I learned when I was studying Carl Jung's psychological functions. There are things that you're strong at, there are things that you're weak at. And when you interact with people who are stronger at things that you are weak at, that's a great learning experience. And even if you improve just a little bit, 10%, it can make a big difference in your life, because you're really, really missing that. Next up is Jyoti.
Okay. I'm going to say something very strange. I think clearing the fog for yourself is a little easier than clearing the fog for somebody else. And however, you owe it to yourself. You owe it to the person who's immersed in that fog, and which he's not even aware of. However, if it's a complicated process and if it is exhausting you and there is no movement in the person, time to walk away.
That excellent point. A person needs to want to see, and
Right.
then you can show him things, but
Correct.
if they don't want to see. That's related. I don't know who was making the point that there are people who actually want the fog. It's like they want the fog not only for themselves, but they actually want to create the fog around other people. Next up is Joe, followed by Kevin. Joe.
Yeah, I'm just going to say something that it kind of relates to authentic relating, the idea of trust and trust in the people that are around you, and that the ability to listen is the way to clear your fog. It's not necessarily anything else other than you trust the person's opinion. And I don't think it necessarily always comes from the places that we think it's going to come from. That's an important distinction. I think it can come from anyone that we interact with. And it often can come from people that, you know, that you would have never expected it to come from, because they see you for who you are, and you're maybe a little bit your more authentic self around them. So I think that it's more about our ability to listen as it is about much as us getting the feedback as well.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, one of Ray Dalio's idea I find very useful. If you have a level of trust with people, this kind of radical honesty of just kind of, you know, that you take for granted that each of us is going in the right direction, trying to go up, and we mean well for each other. And then once you have that, then I think the radical honesty is very, very powerful. Go ahead.
And just one quick thing is that, and sometimes if somebody doesn't have a stake in the game, then they're going to give you their honest opinion.
Yes.
And that is, you know, even if you're married or with someone, they may actually want you, you know, to coach you a certain way. I mean, and that happens. But if a person doesn't, you know, is just your friend, and that's the trust part, then that can be incredibly powerful.
Excellent. Next up is Kevin, followed by Jade. Kevin.
Thank you. I'm going to share two one comments. Don't touch me, right? I would say this word the first time I hear it a little bit uncomfortable. I would say quickly just increase your boundary of your own belief, culture, and practice. But I'm going to mention that the fog embedded in the system. That's mean, but they promoted the way as perfect system. So we need to reveal those previous what's hidden and unknown. Either we heard by the fog itself, or we find the fog, then solve the puzzle. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Jade and Jonathan. Jade.
Another aspect wherein the interplay between people and the fog is that the fog can make things interesting. The fog creates a aura of mystery, so it creates like this mystique. And like I guess we could think of like the enigmatic love interest. You know, that person who's just an enigma, that person you figure out, so you're just fascinated, you just want to know. And I think there are people who naturally have that veil of like mystery around themselves, and you know, that can be alluring.
Thank you. Next up is Jonathan, followed by Sarika. Jonathan.
Yeah, I think fog and how it relates to social situations is pretty interesting, because paradoxically, our fear of rejection is that fog that prevents us from authentically relating to others. And so in order to actually relate to others, to know to others, we actually have to pierce the inner fog that is our fear of revealing ourselves. We can't just go out and meet other people and be like, hey, you know, it doesn't work because you're not really there. You're showing up as sort of like a shell. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Next up is Sarika.
Yeah, I really like what everybody has said. Jade and Sharon. And
we have great people here, Sarika.
Yeah,
you know,
everyone's really
including
smart
you.
and insightful. And I just wanted to say that, yeah, the fog is really difficult to clear. And it's hard when you want to clear something about yourself, but, you know, other people might not like have the ability to communicate in a certain way. Like, you know, people of like a different generation might not have the ability to communicate in a separate way. So it's really a challenge in like to clear the fog when there are all these like impositions because of that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, one of the things I want to say is that it's very interesting at the cultural level. Like if you're trying to understand a culture which is very different from yours, actually there is a lot of growth opportunity there, because there are going to be dimensions along which you have not even thought of, because we get kind of caught up because it's not just us, it's the culture that we grew up in. When you are actually interacting with a culture which is very different, there is going to be a lot of things that you don't know. So there is, again, the same point that Jean was making about benefiting from interacting with people who are very different from you. Next up is Nick.
Yep. Yeah, I thought just one interesting point I was kind of thinking as some people were saying all this is that we have to look, so we all have to fight and kind of clear through our own personal fog. But there's a quote in the book, which is one of my favorites, or in the chapter, which is one of my favorites, and I'll just read it. It says,
please
allow for the possibility that your feelings, however overwhelming and convincing, might be misplaced and in your ignorance pointing you in the wrong direction. And so I think it's interesting that there's the relationship between you're looking internally to try to clear your own fog, but then when you're sharing that, but that you also have to talk to others. And because sometimes some of the things that you're trying to kind of uncover and clear up about yourself that you might think is a problem could be that maybe you're pointing the blame on someone else, is actually, you need to reframe how you're looking at things in the perceptions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Folks, this was fantastic. I really like this lightning round. And I think these meetups are working very well. I think reading this book together and first sharing our takeaways. So each section is kind of designed separately. The first one enables us to really speak our mind about what did we get from this chapter, unaffected by what other people are going to say. So we're just giving our own take. Then we have these two questions. One of them is kind of a general question. One of them is a personal question, which allows us to
Hello, sorry for me to interrupt, but I really am interested in buying the book that you guys are talking about. Don't really know, but I know Jordan Peterson. So if you could please see the book.
Okay, so it's called Beyond Order. Folks, if you could put a link in the chat for Naya. It's the new book that Jordan Peterson has written. And Naya, great to great to have you here. And I'm delighted that you're able to participate, even if you have not read the book so far. And I recommend that you read, because you will get a lot more from it. So what I was saying is that the first one is designed to let people speak their mind. Number two, the breakout rooms are designed for just focusing attention on two questions. One is a general question, one is a personal question. And this third section, which we've just came up with, I think is working very well. Just let me know if you think it's working. If it is excellent, put four in the chat. If it is good, 3, 2, okay, 1, bad. Okay, so there are a good number of 4s. I got a 5 too. Wonderful. All right, so we'll keep doing that because, and again, it depends on people. Number one, coming up with the best question. I'm a big fan of questions because it's a way of kind of opening up your mind, of saying, what is there? And that's actually, if you ask a good question, that's probably the best contribution you can make to somebody else's thinking, more than any answer. And then you have got this entire range of answers that we get. So it's wonderful. So thank you very much, folks. Always honored to see such great, people showing up day after day. And I want to remind you that we've got like incredible meetups this Saturday.